Close your eyes and let the world grow quiet. Imagine the slow hush of desert wind moving across golden sand, brushing against the reeds. The Nile flows steadily under a violet dusk, just as it did more than 2,000 years ago, when a child was born. This is where the story of Cleopatra begins, not in romance, not in ruin, but in the deep current of time itself. Cleopatra was born into the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek royal house that had ruled Egypt since the death of Alexander the Great. For nearly 3 centuries, her ancestors had governed from Alexandria, a place of marble palaces, towering lighthouses, and the greatest library. Though they ruled Egypt, they were not Egyptian by blood. They spoke Greek, worshipped Greek gods alongside Egyptian ones. But Cleopatra would be different. As a young girl, she walked palace corridors, listening to languages swirl around her: Greek, Egyptian, Latin from Roman envoy. She was curious, sharpened, aware the world was shifting. Rome, once distant, was expanding like a rising tide. Her father, King Ptolemy XII, struggled to keep his throne secure. He relied heavily on Roman support, paying enormous sums. Cleopatra watched and learned. She understood early that power did not rest solely in armies. It rested in alliances, intelligence, and timing. Unlike many predecessors, Cleopatra took the trouble to learn the Egyptian language. She could speak many tongues. By speaking to her subjects in their own language, she bridged a gap. She presented herself as the living embodiment of Isis. When her father died, Cleopatra was around 18. She was to rule jointly with her younger brother, whom she married. But shared rule often meant rivalry. Court advisors whispered. Power factions formed. Soon Cleopatra found herself pushed aside, forced to flee Alexandria. In that vast silence, Cleopatra planned her return. At this moment, Rome was embroiled in its own internal conflict. Julius Caesar, a brilliant general, was locked in a struggle against Pompey. Their rivalry would determine Rome's future. When Pompey fled to Egypt seeking refuge, he was assassinated by courtiers hoping to please Caesar. Instead, the act horrified him. Caesar arrived in Alexandria soon after. He was in his early 50s, seasoned by war, politics, and ambition. Cleopatra saw opportunity. The story of how she met Caesar has been retold for centuries. One version tells that she had herself smuggled into the palace, carried past guards, and enrolled before him. Whether embroidered or exact, the tale captures something essential. Cleopatra understood drama. Caesar and Cleopatra formed an alliance that was both political and personal. Together, they confronted her brother's forces. The struggle erupted into open conflict in Alexandria, flames rising near the harbor, ships burning, chaos threading through the city's grand streets. In the end, Cleopatra prevailed. Her brother drowned in the Nile while fleeing battle. She reclaimed her throne. With Caesar's backing, Cleopatra secured her position. She bore him a son, Ptolemy XV, often called Caesarion. In Egypt, she ruled as queen. In Rome, rumors swirled. Some saw her as brilliant, others as a dangerous seductress. But Cleopatra's goals were clear. She sought stability for Egypt, recognition for her son, and a partnership to preserve her kingdom's autonomy. Then, on the Ides of March, Caesar was assassinated. Imagine the shock rippling outward across the Mediterranean. In Alexandria, the news arrived like a distant earthquake. Cleopatra, who had tied her future to Caesar's, suddenly stood on uncertain ground. She returned to Egypt. Caesarion was declared coroner, and Rome, once again, descended into civil war. Out of that chaos emerged a new triumvirate: Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus. Antony took control of the eastern provinces. When he summoned Cleopatra to meet him in Tarsus, she responded with theatrical brilliance. She sailed up the river in a barge, adorned with gold and purple sails, dressed as Isis, surrounded by attendants. The air was thick with incense. Music drifted over the water. Antony was captivated. But again, this was not merely romance. Cleopatra needed a powerful Roman ally. Antony needed Egypt's wealth. Their partnership was strategic, complex, and deeply intertwined. They spent time together in Alexandria, forming a society of revelers. Yet beneath the glitter lay serious governance. Cleopatra secured territories for her children. Antony supported her claims. Cleopatra bore Antony 3 children. She maneuvered diplomatically, maintaining Egypt's prosperity. Trade flourished. Grain shipments continued. She minted coins bearing her image, strong-featured, regal, deliberate. She did not hide behind idealized beauty. She presented authority. But back in Rome, Octavian watched carefully. He understood the power of narrative. He framed Antony as having fallen under a foreign queen's spell. He did not declare war on Antony directly at first. Instead, he declared war on Cleopatra. Propaganda spread through Rome. The conflict culminated in the naval battle of Actium. The sea churned with ships, oars striking rhythmically, sails snapping in harsh wind. Cleopatra's fleet fought alongside Antony's, but the tide turned against them. In a moment still debated, Cleopatra withdrew her ships. Antony followed. The battle was lost. They returned to Egypt, but Octavian's forces advanced relentlessly. Alexandria braced for siege. In those final days, the air must have felt thick with inevitability. Antony, defeated and despairing, ultimately took his own life after hearing false news of Cleopatra's death. Cleopatra retreated to her mausoleum, a monument she had prepared. She attempted negotiations with Octavian, but she understood what awaited her. Humiliation in a Roman triumph, paraded as a conquered queen. She chose her own ending. The exact details remain uncertain. The most famous account tells of an aspa, venomous snake brought to her, concealed in a basket of figs. Others suggest poison applied differently. What remains clear is that Cleopatra died in 30 BCE, around 39 years old. With her death, the Ptolemaic dynasty ended. Egypt became a Roman province. Caesarion was killed. Her other children were taken to Rome. Yet endings in history are rarely absolute. As the centuries passed, Cleopatra's story transformed. Roman writers shaped her image according to their politics. Some described her as dangerously seductive, blaming her for Antony's downfall. Others acknowledged her intelligence and charisma. Over time, she became a symbol of passion, of power, of exotic mystery. In later eras, playwrights and poets revisited her life. Renaissance artists painted her draped across cushions, pearls at her throat. But if we drift back beyond the layers of myth, we find a ruler who spoke multiple languages, who stabilized an economy, who commanded fleets, who negotiated with the most powerful men of her age as an equal. She lived at a hinge point in history. Her legacy is not confined to romance. It is etched in the transformation of the Mediterranean world. After her death, Octavian became Augustus, the first Roman emperor. The Age of Empire began in earnest. Egypt, once independent, became Rome's breadbasket, and still, Cleopatra endures in imagination. Perhaps it is because she defies simple categorization. She was neither purely victim nor villain. She was a strategist in a brutal era. She was a mother protecting her dynasty. She was a monarch balancing tradition and innovation. She was a woman navigating structures dominated by men who commanded legions. If you listen closely, you can almost hear Alexandria at night, the murmur of scholars debating in lamplit rooms, the distant crash of waves against the harbor, the whisper of silk as Cleopatra moves through her palace. She is thinking not only of tomorrow, but of decades ahead. She understands that survival depends on foresight. Her story also reminds us of how history is written. Much of what we know comes from Roman sources writers, shaped by allegiance to Augustus. Their portrayals carried bias. Over centuries, repetition solidified certain images, the temptress, the enchantress. Yet modern historians sift through coins, inscriptions, archaeological remains, searching for the historical Cleopatra beneath literary embellishment. They find evidence of capable administration, of careful religious policy, of economic acumen. They find a queen who aligned herself with Isis to resonate with Egyptian tradition while maintaining Greek heritage. They find a ruler who understood both spectacle and substance. And so, as you sink deeper into rest, imagine the Nile again. It flows past temples and tombs, past fields of grain, bending in warm wind. The river does not hurry. It carries silt from distant highlands, renewing the land year after year. Cleopatra's life, though dramatic, was only a brief flicker against that vast backdrop. Yet like the Nile's flood, her influence reshaped the terrain. She altered alliances. She affected the course of Rome's transformation. She became a figure through whom generations explored themes of love, ambition, power, and identity. In the quiet of night, history feels softer. The clang of swords fades. What remains are human choices. A young queen deciding to learn her subjects' language. A calculated risk taken in a Roman general's chamber. A fleet assembled in hope. A final, private act of defiance. Cleopatra's legacy lives not only in books and plays, but in questions. How does a small nation survive beside a superpower? How does image shape political reality? How do women in authority navigate narratives? Each era answers differently, yet her name continues to surface, luminous and controversial. As sleep draws nearer, picture the last light over Alexandria. The pharaoh's lighthouse sends its beam across dark water. Ships move like shadows. Somewhere within palace walls, a queen writes letters, seals decrees, cradles her children, calculates futures. Time moves on. Empires rise and fall. Sand covers marble. Libraries burn and are rebuilt. But stories endure. And in the gentle current of memory, Cleopatra sails still. No longer merely a figure of scandal or seduction, but a sovereign shaped by her time, and shaping it in return. Let the rhythm of the Nile carry you. Let the desert wind smooth the sharp edges of battle and intrigue. Let the centuries blur into a tapestry of gold and indigo. Her life began with uncertainty and ended with resolve. Between those moments stretched a reign defined by intellect, daring, and resilience. That is the Cleopatra who lingers when the noise fades. The strategist, the linguist, the monarch who stood at the crossroads of worlds. Now the stars wheel slowly overhead. The river keeps flowing, and the story, carried softly through the ages, becomes a lullaby of power and legacy, fading gently into dreams.